Hello! I read some amazing books in 2019 and I have compiled a list of my top 10 with great difficulty, and I'm going to take you through them. This is not in any particular order because it was already difficult enough to narrow it down to 10. I didn't need to make it even more difficult for myself by requiring it to be in order, so we're just going to get straight into it. First up we have Heartstopper by Alice Oseman, which is a graphic novel about an out boy at an all-boys school and a straight boy at an all-boys school who maybe actually isn't straight after all, and it's their love story, and it's incredibly cute and such a fun, light-hearted read that will put a smile on your face, and that's why I absolutely loved this one, because it really cheered me up every time I even thought about it, let alone read it. Then we have a book that I actually read twice this year because I loved it so much. I read it for the first time in around April, I think, and then reread it towards the end of the year, and that was The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, which is a science fiction story that follows the crew aboard the spaceship Wayfarer, which is a tunnelling vessel, meaning that it creates wormholes between two different points in space. It's very episodic. Each chapter is its own sort of mini story, and it really is a story of friendship and personal growth. It's incredibly diverse. It's just such a wonderful, wonderful story, and I highly, highly recommend it. Very emotional. Another sci-fi, we have The Quiet at the End of the World by Lauren James, which is set in the future of the human race following the outbreak of a disease that has rendered humanity infertile, and we follow two teenagers who are the last young people on Earth, and unless the remaining adults can figure out a way to cure the disease and therefore make people fertile again, then they'll be the last two humans alive on Earth, and they're kind of dealing with what that will mean for them. This is an incredibly clever book, and I desperately need to reread it because I think that it's the kind of book that you'll see things on a reread that you didn't see the first time round. The twists and turns that this book takes are amazing, and the relationships are really, really strong too. I absolutely loved it, hence why it's on this list. Then we have Romanov by Nadine Brands, which is a historical fiction novel with some fantasy elements, and it follows the Romanov family. The first sort of half of the book is a fairly historically accurate, as far as I can make out, account of what happened to the Romanov family after Tsar Nikolai stepped down. And then we follow the author's fantastical fictionalisation of what history doesn't remember happens next. And this was a very powerful book. It was a very interesting read. I have loved the film Anastasia for as long as I can remember, but I didn't actually know too much about the Romanovs, and so it was really interesting to learn their history. And then the fictionalised portions of the story were really fun as well. It's quite a devastating book, so don't go into it expecting Heartstopper, because that's not what you're going to get. It's very difficult to read, and the things that humans do to each other is so much worse than any author could make up in their head, and that's what makes this so powerful, because these are true events and things that actually happened to real people in our real world. But it's a very, very good book, and I do highly, highly recommend it, especially if you're interested in Romanov history. And I think this book, more than anything, is the book that made me realise that maybe I don't hate historical fiction as a genre. Maybe I just need to read the right historical fiction, and this definitely was that. Then we have a romance book, Red, White and Real Blue by Casey McQuiston, which follows the fictional first son of the United States and the fictional prince, or one of the fictional princes of the UK, who hate each other except that maybe they don't hate each other. Maybe they actually love each other, and it's just difficult to love each other because they're so in the spotlight, and that makes things complicated. This, again, was a really, really powerful book. It deals with a lot of American politics, which I understood and I did find interesting, but I suspect that an American reader would find all of that a lot more powerful than I did, because it's more relevant to their everyday life than it is to mine. But I did still really enjoy this book. The romance was lovely. The representation, I of course can't speak to how good it was because I'm not a gay man, but I did really enjoy the representation and it seemed to be done well. So I really enjoyed this one, and I'm really glad to get back to reading romance. I don't think this was the first romance that I read in 2019, but it is the one that stands out to me the most. Another one from Alice Oseman now, we have Radio Silence, which follows Frances as she makes some new friends and starts to discover that maybe university isn't the only path to success. I feel like this is a really important book because it speaks on that subject of what do you want to do with your life. There are so many decisions that you have to make between the ages of 16 and 18, and it's a really difficult time in your life because you have all of these really important decisions to make that are potentially going to have a massive impact on the path the rest of your life takes, but you also have no power and no decision making ability because you can't vote, you can't drink. There's a whole load of things that you're not considered mature enough yet to do, and yet you are mature enough to decide what you want to do with the rest of your life, or at least the next 3 or 4 years. And it's not a topic that I've seen discussed a lot in literature, but it is a topic that's discussed in this book. It also deals with a lot of really heavy themes. There are triggers for anxiety, depression, eating disorders, abuse, etc. in this one, so be careful of that, but I did find it incredibly impactful and powerful, and I personally think it's well worth a read. While we're on the subject of impactful contemporary books, we might as well talk about Girl Made of Stars by Ashley Herring Blake, which predominantly follows Mara. Mara has a twin brother, Owen, with whom she is incredibly close, but unfortunately at the beginning of the book, one of her friends accuses Owen of raping her, and that makes Mara's position very, very difficult because she believes her friend. She doesn't believe that her friend would lie about something like that, but that means that her brother is not the person that she thought he was, and how does she cope with that and her relationship with her friend and her brother and her other friends and her parents and everybody around her? It's a very difficult subject matter and it is a very difficult read, but if you're able to read a book that's about this kind of subject, I think that this is a really, really fantastic one. It doesn't shy away from those very difficult topics, and I think that that's really important, that if you're going to approach subject matter like this, that you really dive into it and do that subject matter justice and do justice for all of the victims of this kind of abuse that are out there and are potentially going to read this book or at least hear about it. And I think that Ashley Herring Blake did a fantastic, fantastic job with this one, in my opinion. Moving on now to something a little bit lighter, we have The Afterlife of Holly Chase by Cynthia Hand, which is a gender-bent retelling of Christmas Carol with a few differences. So in this one we follow Holly Chase, who is essentially a Scrooge, and she's visited by the ghosts of Christmas past, present and future, but unlike Scrooge, she doesn't change her ways, and so when she does eventually die, she hasn't improved herself. So she is given the role of Ghosts of Christmas Past, and we follow her dealing with being the Ghost of Christmas Past, and it's... I've spoken about this book quite a lot on my channel recently, so I'm not going to go on and on about it, but I absolutely loved it, and I will reread it forever and ever and ever and always. Then we have Orange by Ichigo Takano, which is a manga that follows a group of friends, one of whom is receiving letters from her future self, giving her instructions on how to help another of her friends who is struggling with depression. This is another one that is very emotional in a deep way, but also there are a lot of happy moments. It's really a roller coaster ride of emotions in this one, and I read the complete collection one for the April magical readathon, so the Owls, and I loved it so much that I read complete collection volume 2 immediately, and I then went out and bought Future, which is the epilogue, I suppose, and read that straight away as well because I just loved this whole story so much. I'm counting all of it as one pick because the content of 2 volumes and an epilogue are around about the same as any of these other books, so I think that that's fair. But this is just such an emotional read. It's got some contemporary elements, some fantasy elements, some hard-hitting elements, some joyous elements. It's a real roller coaster, like I said, and I really look forward to rereading it actually. And then finally, the only true fantasy book on this list, which is incredibly surprising if you know anything about me and my reading preferences, but we have Foundryside by Robert Jackson Bennett. I think the reason this is my only fantasy on this list is because a lot of my fantasy reads this year were rereads, and I'm not including rereads on this list because that's not fair. They've had their chance already in years where I read them for the first time, so they aren't here, and this was just the standout fantasy for me this year outside of that. It is epic fantasy. It's the first in what will be a trilogy. Yes, a trilogy. And again, it's one that I've discussed a fair amount on this channel, so I'll try to be brief. But we follow Sanchia, who is a thief, and she has special powers in that she can read objects' pasts by touching them. And we also have a super interesting other magic system in this world called scriving, which means that if you know the language of the scribes, you can write on objects and persuade them to behave in a manner that they ordinarily would not. So for example, you could persuade a plank of wood that it's not a plank of wood, it's actually a block of cement and therefore has the strength of cement rather than wood, which, as you can see, would be incredibly useful in building, for example, because wood is a lot cheaper than concrete. So that's the premise of it. There's also sentient inanimate object in here, which is one of my favourite tropes ever, and we have an item that has been stolen that has caused all sorts of trouble for Sanchia and the other characters that end up becoming involved in that situation. And I can't wait for book 2. It's coming out soon and I'm truly excited. I'm going to be rereading this one very, very shortly in readiness for that sequel, and I cannot wait. And that's it. Those are my top 10 books from 2019. I really loved all of them. Like I said, I really struggled to put this list together because I did read a lot of really great books this last year, and it makes me very hopeful for 2020 that I will find a new top 10 and maybe they'll make it into my top 10 of all time. Who knows? Let me know if you want me to do a top 10 of all time video. I would probably struggle with that quite a lot, but if you want to see it, let me know and I will torture myself as best I can into compiling that list. But that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks. Bye.